This is Normandy. Famous for the D-Day landings, the events that took place here still leave us awestruck. It's become a place of pilgrimage, a center for commemoration, a magnet for movie makers, and to historians like me. I'm James Holland. My work on the Second World War has taken me to Normandy many times before, but on this trip, I'm hoping to gain a new perspective. This is Dr. Mike Simpson, a decorated US veteran, ex-Special Ops and an Army Ranger, whose unit is legendary in the D-Day story.
You've never been to Normandy, but this is in kind of sort of America's DNA, particularly if you're an ex-serviceman like yourself.
The hairs on my arms are standing a little bit.
It's my privilege to be Mike's guide on his first trip to the battlefield.
That's it. Looks almost exactly the same.
And in return, I hope he can give me new insight using the benefit of his military experience.
When I see this tactically, this is a kill box. You know, every little window here, that can be a machine gun. Every little window can be a sniper.
So here we are, one historian, one seasoned military veteran, and a journey of over 1,000 miles to better understand one of history's great chapters. Beyond the beaches, beyond D-Day, and into the heart of the battle to retake France. This is my home in Wiltshire and the start point for our journey. I believe the narrative of D-Day and Normandy has undersold the story, and I'm looking forward to sharing with Mike my thoughts on the Allies' approach. I call it Big War, a strategy that combined enormous global reach and technology to ensure steel, not flesh, did much of the hard yards.
Well, Mike, I'm so excited about you being here. You come all the way over, and finally you're going to get to Normandy, which is, I have to say, an incredibly beautiful place.
I can't wait to see it. I've seen all the Hollywood depictions. I've walked probably every museum exhibit you possibly can. I've seen the documentaries, but I've never stood on the ground.
Right.
In fact, the hairs on my arms are standing a little bit, standing up a little bit thinking about it.
And that's the point. To properly understand how a campaign like Normandy played out, there's no substitute for seeing it yourself. You have to go there.
Now, we're not going to be able to cover every little bit of ground, but we are going to be looking at quite a lot of detail. And you are going to get a very clear overall impression of how this campaign began, the middle, the end, how it was fought. And I promise you, your mind will be completely changed about D-Day. War is fought on 3 levels. So the strategic is obviously the overview, you know, the ultimate aims. This is the kind of high-end stuff. This is your generals and your presidents and prime ministers and so on. Then you've got the tactical, which is the cold face of war. So this is your guy in his foxhole in the bocage, the actual fighting bit. And then you've got the operational level. And that's the bit that's been left out of the narrative. And that's what links the strategic to the tactical. It's the nuts and bolts. It's the economics of war. It's factories. It's Hershey bars. It's cups of tea for our Tommies.
Because it doesn't matter how good your plan is. It doesn't matter how brave and how physically fit your troops are. If you can't keep them paid, keep them fed, keep them supplied on the move, you're not going to win anything.
No, exactly.
Yeah. This is the big piece that never gets talked about.
Absolutely. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a couple of days here in the UK, touring around. I'm going to show you some camps, and then we're going to go over across the channel overnight, just like the boys did on D-Day, and then we're going to tour around.
Can't wait.
The Allies had really begun to hone the concept of big war by the eve of D-Day. It was something the Germans never achieved in anything like the same scale. Nowhere illustrates this disparity better than the Battle of Normandy. The gargantuan scale and complexity of D-Day and the campaign that unfurled is barely imaginable today. We've become too focused on the men leaping from the landing craft and not looking exactly how they came to be there and what was supporting them.
It's the worst weather in this car because you get all the spray from the road comes up.
We're heading southwest into Dorset and to where many of the Americans who would be landing on D-Day were training in the months and years beforehand.
Blandford Camp's just over there, and this is where the 29th Infantry were.
Okay.
So all this was huge, great camps here.
Yeah. This would have been all rifle ranges, maneuvers back and forth.
Exactly.
Everything.
And so they did exercises down on the coastline and down on the beaches and stuff. But this is where they were camped.
Yeah.
As a US Army Ranger, this is where Mike's Normandy campaign would have started back in 1944. These troops were destined for Omaha Beach and Pointe du Hoc.
So Mike, we're gonna see Steve George, and he's a guy I've known for a little while. He got in touch with me because I was doing some work down here, but I didn't really know anything about Broadman. I've got to say. I mean, I know the 1st Division was here, but I don't know much about him. He is the expert. And he's also got an amazing museum in Castletown.
Before D-Day, this corner of Dorset was home not only to the Rangers, but the entire US 1st Infantry Division, known as the Big Red One.
Not bad. Good to see you again.
Yeah, thanks for coming out. I really
That's okay.
appreciate it. This is Mike Simpson.
Hey, how are you doing?
Mike.
Very nice to meet you.
He's a friend of mine. He's ex-Rangers, ex-US Special Forces. I mean, I was just saying to Mike, I know a bit about Broadman. I know the 1st Infantry Division were here, but I don't know much about it.
Tiny small village in Dorset. End of the summer, or late summer, 43. All the Americans all of a sudden just turn up and basically take over the place. So, yeah, 1st Infantry Division, 18th Infantry Regiment, they're here. Rangers, they're also here.
2nd and 5th?
Second.
2nd Rangers are here.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then some of the guys from 116th Infantry Regiment, 29th Infantry Division. But you can see this one, this is the first one you'll see. It's weathered, but there you go.
Look, there it is.
Big red one?
So is that a big red one?
Yeah.
Private John, and I can't read this bit. Have you worked it out yet, Steve?
No.
Because what you want to know is what happened to these guys. Did they make it?
Depending on the time of day and the sunshine and everything like that, it does look a lot different, if you know what I mean.
Isn't it amazing? It's just that tactile link, isn't it? to all those years ago.
There were over 1 million US troops in England at this time, some of whom had been training for more than 2 years. Incredibly, more Allied soldiers died training for D-Day than were killed on the 6th of June. Others were victims of the Luftwaffe.
The village was hit a couple of times.
Really?
Yeah. So, in fact, yeah, there's loss of life. You know, the Americans, you know, we had 2 KIA confirmed and at least 18 wounded. It sounds a bit soppy, but, you know, they were living, loving and dying, you know, within our communities. And people don't realise that. They just think, oh, it's all about what happened over there. But it started here. You know?
No, it's so strange to think of an
We've been
American...
talking about that already, haven't we?
Yeah, an American World War II KIA killed on UK soil. That's not something we talk about back home. Didn't know
No,
that.
it's amazing.
In May 1944, the Americans here were spread out across several camps. 2 men at Camp A were Tom and Dee Bowles of the 18th Infantry Regiment of the 1st Infantry Division.
So these guys are people I met years and years and years ago, and they were identical twins, and they both landed in the same company on Easy Red
Really?
on D-Day. And we took them down here because they had this photo that they'd taken back in the war outside this pub.
Hello.
Hi there, hi there, hi there. Fine, thank you. So what you can have?
I don't remember fireplace being there. This is all here.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers to the Bowles twins.
Yeah, yeah, indeed. That window look familiar?
Yeah, it's that window right there.
Yeah, yeah. Come here and look at this one. There's the door.
There's the door.
So it's changed. They've got to put a porch on it,
Yeah.
and it's absolutely one and the same place,
Yeah,
isn't it?
Sure is.
I know we had some guys worried about getting home to their wives and everything, but we didn't have anything to worry about. The 18th Infantry was our home.
The Bowles twins weren't new to combat. They've been through multiple campaigns. And that picture you showed me where they're here having a beer with their mates. And they're looking at each other and they know some of these guys aren't going to make it.
So when you're just about to go on deployment, you're about to go on operations. I mean, what do you think these guys would be feeling as they're getting ready to go across the channel?
I kind of lump them into 3 different groups. In one group, I would lump the Bowles twins, right? So these are the battle-hardened veterans. They've seen it before. They've seen the elephant, as we say. They've been there. They've done that. On the other end, on the far end of the spectrum, I put the fresh troops who've had basic training back home, and they've come over as replacements. Okay, most of them are on the younger end of the spectrum. They're probably very nervous about this. They're looking to those mentors. And then the third group is where I put the guys from Easy Company, right? The guys from Band of Brothers. Because although they've had extensive training and they've been together as a cohort for a real long period of time,
They've not been tested, have they?
they haven't been tested at all.
But are you feeling kind of excited? Are you feeling
All of the
scared?
above.
Are you feeling apprehensive? Do you sort of get those little moments sort of thinking, gosh, I wonder if this is the last time I'll have this or the last time I'll do this because?
Yeah, I mean, I've written the death letter before.
Have you?
And given it to somebody and handing them my dog tags in one hand and saying, these are for my youngest son, and the ball cap I used to wear in the other hand and saying, this is for my oldest son. And he said, I won't get him messed up. And giving him my death letter and saying, this is for my wife.
But it is a leap into the unknown, isn't it?
It's a leap into the unknown, not as much for the weaponry, equipment, and training as it is for yourself. Because you don't know when the first shot is fired in anger, what am I gonna do?
Right.
Am I gonna do what I'm supposed to do? Am I gonna run to the sound of gunfire? Am I gonna freeze? And you don't know that until it happens. But I do have to say, I mean, the first time that I knew that I was gonna get shot at on purpose was a little bit different than all the other times thereafter.
Discover the past with exclusive military history documentaries and ad-free podcasts presented by world-renowned historians, all on History Hit. Watch them on your smart TV or on the go with your mobile device. Download the app now to watch everything, from the gripping story of the Band of Brothers to Operation Barbarossa and D-Day. Immerse yourself in the dramatic stories of this remarkable era by signing up via the link in the description.
One comfort for the young Allied troops readying for battle was the huge material wealth that would support them.
What the Allies have worked out by 1944 is their way of war. They're going to use steel, not flesh, as far as they possibly can. So they're going to use industrialization, mechanization, to do a lot of the hard yards so that a generation of young men doesn't have to do it.
The Allied support tail was immense, not just in terms of firepower, but also repair workshops, the best medical support, and plentiful food. No wonder nearly 50% of Allied soldiers were service troops.
Yes, we've got this vast array of supplies over here in southern England, and millions of men, but you can only take so much across the Channel on D-Day itself.
Right.
So it's the battle of the builder.
The challenge for the Allies was to get these supplies across the Channel in enough strength before the Germans achieved their own build-up in Normandy. Castletown in Portland was just one of the many ports in southern England preparing for D-Day.
So Mike, I've got loads of photos here, and there's nothing I like more than a good then and now, and look at this, okay? So look at that.
Oh, that was literally taken from right where we're standing.
On the 4th of June, 5th of June, this place was absolutely teeming. I can visualize these landing craft here. I can visualize those trucks and men milling around here as they are in this place. I mean, here they are. You know, this is here.
Yeah.
Right against that wall is where these guys are. They're coming down right down here.
Yeah.
The logistics of it are just staggering. You know, you're talking about over 4,100 vessels.
Right.
It's like total invasion fleet, something like 7,000 craft. You know, all along the ports, all along the southern coast. You've got to get the right people in the right place at the right time onto the right vessel. I mean, it's a heck of a process.
Yeah.
And you know, there is so much that can go wrong at any one moment. But that's what enables you to actually do the invasion.
The challenge wasn't just in getting the material across the channel. There was also the problem of unloading at the other end with no available port. The solution was outrageous, but brilliant.
See that?
Yeah.
That big block of concrete? Mm-hmm. That is a Phoenix caisson. And actually, that was part of the Malberry Harbour.
Really?
There were two built. They used 332,000 cubic yards of concrete and 32,000 tons of steel. They're two floating harbours the size of Dover.
And then it was just pushed with a tug? Is that how it made it across?
Pushed with a tug, yeah.
Wow.
It's an unbelievably ambitious project, come up with a guy called Lieutenant Commander John Hughes Hallett. What always amazes me about the Mulberry Harbours is just the fact that someone had the audacity to even think about them in the first place. Mm-hmm. It's like, I know what we'll do. We'll create this huge kind of floating blocks of concrete and we'll build them and they'll be the size of Dover, and then we'll get some tugs and we'll float them across the channel and then we'll plant them and then we'll have a harbour and it'll be just like that. Isn't that a great idea? And everyone sort of starts scratching their heads and going, actually, no, that's not a really good idea. That's just, how on earth are we ever going to construct that? You know, we are in the middle of a war, by the way, guys. You know, we've got other things to think about. And Churchill, who's always one for kind of jumping onto anything that's kind of new and innovative, says, oh, don't argue the matter. That'll just sort itself out. Just get on with it and make it. And they do.
We're now heading to Tarrant-Rushden Airfield. Allied air forces were vital to plans for Overlord. For 2 months they had been bombing bridges, railways and communication systems in France and northwest Europe, and very successfully too. From this base it was gliders that would be taking off. D-Day would see the largest force of airborne troops ever to be used.
I kind of see the way they use the gliders as like the predecessor to how we use helicopters. Is we need to put people right here.
Yep.
You know, right at this spot. Because if they have any reaction time at all, that's going to ruin everything. We got to deliver the entire aircraft load right away, form up and move. There is none of this hitting an assembly point and then going. It's boom, you got to do it all at once.
Right.
And that's how all my ops have been.
The gliders were to be used to capture very specific and vital targets as swiftly and clinically as possible.
The only way you're going to stop them from blowing up the bridges was by coming in by glider. Then you can jump out, take them by surprise, capture the bridge before they set off the demolitions. That's the idea. But most people think it's going to be really, really, really difficult and a big ask.
From here, 6 gliders, each with 28 men, were given the task of taking 2 bridges, codenamed Horsa and Pegasus, that ran across the River Orne and the Caen Canal.
But imagine what it's like. I mean, there's a guy called Dennis Edwards who was still a teenager. He thinks it's going to be a suicide mission. You know, he barely sleeps a wink the night before. They're given a last pint of beer, you know, and then it's time to load up.
My muscles tightened. A cold shiver ran up my spine. I went hot and cold and sang all the louder to stop my teeth chattering.
I did over 250 jumps in my career.
Really? That's a lot.
And I remember almost every single one in detail.
That's amazing.
But the thing about a jump in training is you have all this adrenaline going up to it. You know, your mouth gets dry, you feel the knot in your stomach, you're excited, all your senses are completely heightened, but you know, you get down to the ground, you land safely, and then there's this feeling where you relax because it's over now. The big life threat has passed. But for these guys, their day was just starting. And it reminds me of something an old Sergeant Major said. He said, Airborne is a great title. But that's not who we are, that's just how we get to work.
It's important to remember the Allies were fighting on 3 fronts, in the air, on land and at sea. Our next destination is Portsmouth, the epicenter of D-Day planning, and where the mind-bogglingly complex naval plan was prepared. It's where the Allied senior commanders, drawn from all 3 services, had based themselves.
And by and large, you find that the Allies are getting on really well with one another. There are exceptions, there are flare-ups, there are disagreements, of course. But for the most part, they work incredibly well. And the level of cooperation and coordination is absolutely extraordinary. When you compare that with the Germans and how they treat one another and how they treated their allies throughout the war, it's just in a different league. And actually, that all comes from the top.
General Dwight D. Eisenhower was the supreme Allied commander. He pressed the importance of unity of endeavour at every turn. It was vital.
I've been in the Joint Operational Center and seen Navy SEAL commanders and Tier 1 Army commanders argue vehemently over a point. Because if you have a Tier 1 Special Operations unit performing a mission and another unit in support, another unit providing the transportation, they're all going to have a little bit of a disagreement about how their assets should be utilized within the battle space. And they're always going to have those discussions, and they're always going to be passionate about it.
Right.
Everybody wants to be heard, because at the end of the day, everybody wants to walk out of that planning meeting knowing that they were the best advocate possible for their own troops and the best advocate possible for how they see the completion of the mission. And then ultimately, even after all that, you're going to recognize the chain of command and you're going to do what you're told.
The plan was devised by a combined services multinational planning team and approved at every step of the way by the Allied leadership. The architect, though, was General Bernard Montgomery, the overall Allied land commander for D-Day. Monty is a controversial figure, and one that has garnered increasing criticism in recent years. I believe a lot of this is unjustified, and that it's time to reappraise his war effort.
What you have to understand is that Monty is a really cussed, difficult character. He's you know, people have said actually he was on the spectrum or he was actually autistic. He has this total inability to read what other people are thinking. And that constantly gets him into trouble, but that doesn't make him a bad general. The basic idea is they land here, at Utah Beach here, and then at 5 along here, and this is where Band would have been. This is the River Orne and the Caen Canal. So they're going to come in here, land here. Now the most important thing, airborne forces are going to come in at the bottom of the Cotentin Peninsula here, secure this, protect this landing here, and ditto here, and this is the really key bit for the British, secure this bridge here over the River Orne there, and then knock out all the bridges here and get this high ground. And that stops 15th Army, because the French coastline goes up that way, and it stops 15th Army coming here and attacking from the flanks. That means that bit's secure, and they can push forward. And I think, all things considered, with the limitations on shipping, this is about as good a plan as you can possibly have.
Bad weather delayed the invasion by 24 hours. But a bigger concern was ensuring clear channels for the invasion fleet, a job entrusted to 255 minesweepers. The Allied air forces dropped 197,000 tons of bombs on strategic targets in the 9 weeks before D-Day. This effort was crucial to the plan of subduing the German response. Once landed, the cat would be out of the bag and the race would be on. Who would build up a decisive number of troops and weapons first, the Allies or the Germans?
Well, you can see the first hint of dawn over there, Mike.
And we're actually going to hit the beach right about the time they were hitting the beach. So everybody's awake at this point, whether they could sleep during the night or not, and you're hearing these shells go overhead.
Yeah.
So it's becoming very real to you at this point.
Everyone on those boats is feeling apprehensive, scared, freezing cold, soaked to the skin.
Yeah.
You know, that's before you even got to the beach.
Right. Well, this is the point as a soldier that your mind is going through that mental checklist again and again and again. You're rechecking your battle rifle, you're rechecking your equipment, you're checking your mates to your left and right, and you're thinking about everything you're going to have to do when you hit the beach. This is the point that they're going through their part of the plan again and again and again and again. But that's a good thing, because in a way it kind of keeps you from being so scared that you're going to freeze up. And that's also how you ensure success, because they've rehearsed it so much at this point that it's become this mental checkoff that they're going to tick off as soon as the ramp goes down.
But as D-Day dawned, Much hinged on the next few hours and whether the airborne forces had achieved their aims and the landing troops would manage to secure a foothold. No one was certain how strongly the Germans would defend, how efficiently they would reinforce the bridgehead, or how quickly they would react.
Oops! Forgot what side of the road I was on.
It was inevitable. It was inevitable at some point.
We've come ashore and are heading inland to see where the British airborne forces were dropped. The glider-borne troops from Tarrant Rushden landed on the 6th of June at our first stop, Pegasus Bridge.
If you undershoot, even by 100 yards or so, now you have to fight across that same open ground that was perfect to land on. You now have to fight across. And then if they overshoot, same scenario, only it's even worse. Because now certainly everybody on both sides of the bridge and in the village has seen you. And now you're fighting your way back.
The men of D Company, the Ox and Bucks, landed at Pegasus and Horsa Bridges at around 16 minutes past midnight.
What they're doing is they're coming over here like this, circling round and then coming down. It's exactly as they think it's going to be. You know, they've studied the photographs so well, they've studied the map so well, and what you've got is this gun position here. This is Pegasus Bridge.
Relief, exhilaration, incredulity. I experienced all these feelings upon realising that we had taken the bridge.
And this is where he comes to a halt.
What was the activity like on the ground? Were they taking fire as they were coming in?
Absolutely not at all. No,
None?
No.
None.
They come down here, the front of the glider just nudges the wire around here. They jump out, chucking grenades in at these gun positions, storm across the bridge, and they've got it. And they discover that the charges hadn't even been put on the bridge.
The whole reason that they had to get in and seize the bridge quickly was so they wouldn't have time to hit that detonator. And it was never in place anyway. So
it was never in place anyway.
So the plan went perfectly, but as it turns out, they actually probably could have kind of strolled in down the road and they would have had time to do it.
Yeah, they capture the cafe on the other side there. There's a little railway line that runs up and down. And they capture that, and the guy digs up his champagne from kind of, you know, which he's buried since the start of the occupation, gets it out, everyone has a glass, and everyone's sort of going, well, this is great and everything, but actually we've got kind of a battle to fight.
I'm also keen to take Mike to Ronville Church, just a mile east of Pegasus Bridge.
So, Mike, the first airborne troops to land are the Ox and Bucks down at Pegasus Bridge, but the first paratroopers to land are the 22nd Independent Parachute Company, and they are the Pathfinders. So these are the guys with the Eureka beacons and all the rest of it on the ground, setting up the drop zones. Anyway, one of the guys is Sergeant Herb Fussell, and he's with his mate, and his mate is desperate for a number 2. And there's an outside privy here at the church. So his mate goes in there, and Herb is sitting here smoking a cigarette, standing here. Suddenly, a frightened German bursts through the gates, runs up towards him with his MP40, his Schmeissy, and his submachine gun, and goes like that. And there's the bullet holes.
So Herb's completely unharmed?
Yeah, he's just standing there, and he doesn't move an inch, and the bullets have just gone wide. So he then shoots the German dead. The guy comes out of the, having had his number 2, going, what on earth's happened here? And he said, we just got attacked by a German.
This church holds the graves of many of those British airborne troops killed in the first hours of D-Day.
But you can see they bury a lot of the paras around the edge here.
One grave in particular holds a special significance.
Okay, so this is Lieutenant Den Brotheridge. And you can see here, the first British soldier to fall on the 6th of June. It's an amazing place to see all these graves around the churchyard like this, and to know that most of them were killed in the kind of, you know, opening hours of D-Day.
Yeah, it really brings it home.
Should we go?
The paratroopers also had a critical job to do. Their main task was to destroy 5 key bridges over the River Dives, several miles east of Ronville. The paratrooper drop was far more scattered than those of the glider-borne troops.
So the guy who's in charge of the engineers that have got to destroy these bridges is a guy called Major Tim Roseveare. Okay, and he lands at drop zone N when he's supposed to land at drop zone K, because the pathfinders for drop zone K get mistakenly dropped here in N.
Okay, so the beacon was there, it just wasn't where it was supposed to be, so the pilots dropped there.
So the pilots dropped them here. So instead of landing here, and they've actually then got to get an extra kind of 3 miles. So they managed to come across a Jeep full of medical supplies. And they go, hang on a minute, we're going to have this. Our needs are greater right now. So I'm commandeering this Jeep. And they've got these 2 little trolleys full of 500 pounds worth of explosives. They transfer it into the kind of the Jeep, which has got a little trailer on it. They set up a guy with a Bren gun in the back of the trailer, and they go, right, let's go for it. Hurtling down, there's the deep valley, all flooded, all that area. The trailer swaying around like mad. They're presumably swerving as well to kind of make themselves a harder target.
They managed to drive through Trouarn and kept going towards the bridge. Reaching it, they placed the charges and successfully blew it up. Mission accomplished.
Well, isn't it amazing seeing this? I had no idea this was here. And of course, the new bridge, because they blew it up.
Right. Strategically and operationally, this is just a huge objective. You look at it and you say, wow, what a small bridge, but pivotally, so important to the battlefield.
Yeah, but also look how deep it is. I mean, you're not going to get across that in a hurry.
No.
But it's amazing. So I've got the rest of his after-action report. So on our arrival at the bridge, which was not held, we found Sapper Peachy and his Bren were missing. So obviously, as they've careered down this hill, lurching violently from one side to another, poor old Peachy has fallen out of the trailer. And actually what happens to him is he gets captured.
Well, I mean, they had no choice, because he even says their primary objective was here.
Yes.
And every moment that they wasted there, they could reinforce
Well, they only realised
here.
he'd gone once they got here.
Right.
So at that time, they're not going to get back
At that
now,
point, you're not going to wait. You're never going to fight for the same piece of ground twice.
Well, try arguing that with Sapper Peachy. He was not a happy bunny. But anyway, so he says, so they then blow up the bridge. He said the whole centre span being demolished, giving a gap of 15 to 20 feet. The time taken was about 5 minutes. So 5 minutes to get out, get your general Wade charges on, blow it up. The net result is, despite people being dropped in the wrong drop zone, despite the chaos, despite the mayhem, despite people landing in the swamp and all the rest of it, actually, the whole thing is completely successful.
Right.
You know, they take the Pegasus Bridge, they take Horsa Bridge, they blew up every single one of the 5 bridges along here that they're supposed to. So you'd have to say the British airborne operations are totally successful. They're not successful in the way that is being planned, but who cares?
Right.
Amazing. I'm so glad we come here, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Such a good story. I'd say, it just kind of reminds you of Kelly's Heroes, doesn't it?
Whilst we're unable to follow a strict chronology as we drive across Normandy, I do want to give Mike a flavour of all that happened here during the battle. My plan for today is to take him to some of the beaches where the British and Canadians landed. Then we'll be heading west to the American half of the invasion front.
The French mayor of Colville says, right, you know, when the first Allied troop arrives, we will double name our town after that person. So they see this British private, and he goes, oh, well, cheers, mate, but I couldn't possibly do that. I better go up to my sergeant. And the sergeant goes, oh, I couldn't possibly do that. I have to go up to my platoon commander. And the British guy goes, I can't possibly do that. I must go all the way. I must go up to my my company commander. And it goes all the way up to Montgomery. He says, thank you very much.
So it is to Colville, Montgomery that we are heading, the centre of Sword Beach and around 10 miles north of Normandy's largest city, Caen.
Recognise that?
That's it. Looks almost exactly the same.
Yeah, isn't that great?
Yeah.
And there they are. And see how much this has been churned up. All this battle damage. But that is just, every part of that is exactly the same, isn't it?
It's at a slightly
Well, the
different angle.
steeple is the church. That's
Yeah.
the church, so it was completely destroyed
Okay,
and it's
yeah,
rebuilt.
so it's a completely different church now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
so
this
that's
is
gone.
pretty much right at the angle that's taken at. Wow.
And there's that one. The only bits that have gone is these little bits here.
And
But
you can-
again, look at all the damage to the tiles.
Yeah, yeah.
None of the British and Canadian beaches were easily won. Bitter fighting marked sword, but there were other complications too.
And what you've got here is British 3rd Division. And British 3rd Division has been swollen, so it's about 23,000 strong.
Although reinforced, a large part of the attacking force were commandos, whose mission was to swiftly help reinforce the airborne troops. The tide here was especially high, and the beach was becoming quickly congested. This meant supporting tanks and artillery were soon behind schedule to help clear Hillman, the vital German strongpoint, 2 miles inland.
And so they just get bogged down, and Hillman doesn't fall till after dusk. And by that time, it's too late to get to Caen. Anyway, to the Canadians.
Let's go.
We've now moved west to Juno Beach. It's often forgotten how key the Canadian part was in the D-Day story. So I'm keen for Mike to see where they came ashore at around 7:45 a.m. Joining our trip as part of the crew is historian Paul Woodage, a Brit in Normandy who knows the battlefield intimately. Here at Saint-Aubin, the Germans again defended ferociously.
So there was at least 2 or 3 machine guns down that section of houses there. There was the heavy one about where the lamppost is, where the bathrooms are now, and that little fence. Another one in the building behind, then
Mortars
2
on
or
the
3
roof.
lots of mortars around in the gardens behind, all zeroed in. And they built it all in the existing French seawall here.
Yeah, smart.
This one gun covers the beach that way,
Yep.
the beach that way, that road, and that road. Sword, you can just walk off it.
Right.
Gold, you can just kind of walk off it. But
Yeah,
here
yeah.
you've got a good 8 foot that wall.
Yeah.
This has all of the disadvantage that we saw at Sword plus more. I mean, it's got the narrow beach, so you're bottled up here. You had to get over the seawall, and then same choke points. And then once you get through the choke points, you've got this maze you have to weave your way through just to get out of here. So where were the German mortar positions? Do you know?
They're sort of 75 yards back that way. They'd cleared out back gardens of houses. I mean, they couldn't see the beaches, but they had everything
You don't
zeroed
have
in.
to, though. Yeah. So how I would have done it is just like that, and I would have pre-fired all of that. And as soon as they tell you coming in, you have somebody coming up here with a spotter. You're usually on a wire ground phone, and he's just telling you which pre-selected target positions to be firing in, and you can do it all day long.
Percentage-wise, as the landing force, more Canadians die here than Americans in Omaha, or Brits on Sword.
Yep.
Smallest force, so it's about 380, 390 guys die, which doesn't sound very many, but of a force of
2 brigades, which is nothing.
Yeah, 9,000 or something.
You think there's 2.5 divisions landing at Omaha?
Yeah, percentage-wise, that's a lot of casualties.
Yeah, yeah, it is. The Canadians always get left out of the narrative, but their effort here is absolutely phenomenal.
We're now leaving the British sector behind and heading west. While the British dropped 1 division of paratroopers, the Americans sent in 2, the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, more than 13,000 men. They had an equally crucial role to play in securing the westward flank.
The paratroopers that assembled here, where were they landing? Were they mostly landing this way,
Oh,
this way?
all around.
All
Yeah.
around.
This is Lafayette, where part of the 82nd Airborne landed next to the River Murderay.
See, that, as a paratrooper, that absolutely terrifies me, knowing that this whole area was flooded. These guys are jumping low, so they're below even 800 feet. They're between 500 and 800.
Yeah, they're supposed to be dropped at 600 feet with the Dakotas, the C-47s reduced to about 110 miles an hour.
Okay, so you come out. Obviously the first thing you do is look up. Even in the dark, you can kind of survey it. You can see your suspension lines. Okay, I'm under a good parachute. I don't have an in-air emergency. Then the next thing you need to do is you need to check around you, because you don't know how close the guy in front and in back of you came out, or from a neighboring aircraft.
Right.
So there could be somebody right there you're getting ready to collide with, and that's going to ruin both of your nights. So you don't want that. So now I'm trying to figure out what I'm landing in. And if the clouds have obscured the moon, all I'm seeing is darkness. And maybe I'm hearing that splash as my fellow paratroopers are hitting the water. So then I've got just enough time to really worry about it, because I have no idea how deep it is, right? Is this the actual river that they're landing into right here? Or is it just a little bit of swampy land?
Right. But 600 feet is, you know, and obviously people are being dropped less than that, and some people are being dropped a lot higher than that. But just say 600 feet. How long are you in the air for with that?
Literally, in the time that I just took to explain it, that was more time than they would have had. But to me, that would have been absolutely terrifying, landing in water with all that kit that they had on.
It is interesting that the number of people that are drowned in this flooded area is actually comparatively small.
Yeah, we think it's about two dozen.
Whereas the myth, the way the narrative is told, suggests we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, sort of, you know, are coming down.
They're abandoning their equipment, though. That's the thing.
Yes.
So you're getting the cliche here, and it is a cliche, but it's a true cliche. The guy's coming out with a fighting knife between their teeth, and that's all they've got. They're not dead, but they've left behind all the heavy gear. So when they're here dealing with the attacks later on, they've got like 6 rounds of bazooka ammunition between them, because all the rest is all down there.
Right.
While the 82nd Airborne were holding the high ground to the west of the key town of Saint-Mère-Église, the 101st were given the task of protecting the US landing at Utah Beach.
So I've been to Brecourt Manor loads and loads and loads of times, but I have never, ever walked in the field.
Really?
No.
To me, Dick Winters is the quintessential Army leader in every sense of the word. Cared about his men. He was hard when he needed to be. Kept himself to a high standard. Expected the same of his men. Led from the front.
Yeah, absolutely.
Led from the front.
Yeah, again, and not just here, but also in Carentan as well, which we'll be going to.
Extremely important.
We're heading to Brecourt Manor, immortalised in the TV series Band of Brothers.
Depths of damage up there on the window.
Yeah, but that looks
above the archway,
well.
and here as well. And be aware the electric fences will all be on, so...
Okay.
You're in my world now, James. I know this.
Yeah, I want to be led.
Just a handful of men from Easy Company, the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, were ordered to capture and destroy 4 guns that threatened Utah.
So my turn to name drop. I've been here across here with Don Malarkey.
Have you?
Twice or 3 times, Compton twice, and Garnier twice.
As we're about to discover, though, the reality was quite different from the TV drama.
The sequence in the show is 12 minutes of bang, 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 bang.
Yeah.
But of course it wasn't like that. You're talking like an hour and a half of intermittent fighting to get this point.
Lieutenant Dick Winters, the commanding officer, had to decide his plans swiftly. The main route of attack was using an ancient culvert that ran towards the German guns.
Of course, it's full summer, there's a big green canopy over here, and you can crawl up that way then.
So that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Because you've got your advance completely covered.
Yeah.
No one's going to see a thing.
These few men successfully destroyed all 4 guns and demonstrated that in terms of training, the Allied airborne troops were among the very best.
You know, it just underlines the point, doesn't it? Why it is so important to walk the ground. When you walk the ground, things become clearer in a way they never can in a kind of 2D map or just a description from a book.
Yeah.
Our final stop for the day may not be the one you would expect. Although we're heading east towards Omaha Beach, arguably the most famous location in the D-Day story, it will have to wait. There's a location to the west of the beach that Mike has been longing to visit since a child, when he first set his sights on becoming a US Army Ranger. Pointe du Hoc.
To me, this is hallowed ground. I mean, ever since my military infancy, these were the first stories that I ever heard. This is what senior NCOs pointed to and said, this is what your predecessors did at Pointe du Hoc. This is what we can expect from you when the time comes.
And so these are all craters from the bombing, Mike, and this place was absolutely pounded repeatedly. I mean, when the Rangers got to the top, they just said, you know, we were just looking at a moonscape. They actually get up with absolutely no problem whatsoever. I mean, there's hardly any casualties at all. There's hardly any firing whatsoever. When they get up here, they find there's absolutely no Germans and no guns. So actually scaling up the cliffs is like the biggest doddle of all. What is amazing about this site here and the battle here is the counterattacks that follow later on D-Day and on the 7th of June, and they're not finally relieved until the 8th, I think.
It's 8th, 10:30 in the morning.
10:30 in the morning on the 8th. So they hold out here with diminishing amounts of ammunition, and it's a fantastically heroic stand. But that's what's brilliant about this. That's where the Rangers earn their spurs, not scaling up the cliffs.
To me, that's even more inspiring. They came up these cliffs with only what they could carry on their backs and pull up behind them, right? They're not heavily armed. They're certainly not mechanized. They don't have a lot of fire support with them. So it's literally their GI shirts and their individual weapons, and they're holding this ground against a counterattack. And what's behind them are those same sheer cliffs that they climbed up. So they have to hold this ground. I mean, there's no two ways about it. They have to do so. That's the movie that I want to see. I can think of two moving moments in my lifetime when I went to a place and it literally struck me with emotion down to my core. The other time was at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. And this time is here. It's because it's something that has become larger than life, larger than existence in my mind. Because this is hallowed ground, as I said. This is iconic in Ranger history. And no matter what I do, no matter what I do in the rest of my life, I'm always going to be a Ranger. So.
Mike's connection with this landscape is understandable. So much of our perception of the Normandy campaign is driven by the legend of events that took place here, or by the emotional connection with veterans who fought in the battle. As our journey moves inland, what I want to show Mike is that the battle has only just begun. It's early on the second morning of our Normandy trip, and for the whole crew, the day begins before sunrise. From our base in Armange, we're traveling east to the most famous location in the D-Day story. Having first secured air superiority over France, an invasion fleet left Britain on Monday the 5th of June, 1944. A seaborne fleet of 135,000 Allied troops, wide awake on the waves, ready to smash their way into Nazi-occupied France. As the Germans stationed here were starting their day, few were prepared for the scale of the Allied invasion about to hit. And so it's in the early dawn light, high above the bluffs, that I want Mike to have his first experience of Omaha Beach.
I mean, this is really part of kind of American cultural DNA, isn't it now?
Completely. It's, especially militarily, I mean, it's woven into everything. Anytime in training for leadership, for tactics, for strategy, the D-Day examples always come up.
And always to Omaha Beach.
Always to Omaha Beach.
But how often is Omaha seen from the German point of view?
You've got little bunkers here. In your mind, you know, when you're thinking about the kind of narrative of Omaha Beach and D-Day and all the rest of it, in your mind's eye, how many German defenders do you think there are facing the Americans that are landing? I mean, in this entire stretch along here.
This entire stretch? 2 divisions?
Yeah, well, yeah, sort of. Right here on the beach is about 350 men.
That's it?
Yes. 350 men from here until right over there, 5 miles.
Good Lord.
Mike, whenever I'm at Omaha Beach, I always kind of think, you know, the whole narrative is from the American perspective. But if you were Germans here and you waking up, it's dawn, and suddenly you look out onto that sea there and you see it black with ships and landing craft, to a man, they all say, we were terrified.
My very first impression is that beach is much wider than I ever imagined it.
There's not one gun on Omaha Beach of a caliber of above 88mm. Out on that naval bombardment group here at Omaha, there are 183 guns of 90mm caliber and above. And you know, these concrete bunkers might be able to stand it, and most of them do, but very quickly, your ability to withstand this sheer weight of fire that's coming over diminishes with every passing minute.
I was frozen. I saw all those men in olive brown uniforms splashing through the water towards the sand. I pulled my trigger up tight. My mind rationalized it. This was war.
And you get to the point in the assault also that the mechanics of the terrain turn the tides on you and work against you. We can't clearly see what's right down there. So once they cross that ground, they can get a little breather at the base of the hill, because as they get closer and closer in, the only way that I can engage them is actually to physically get up, to try to peek down, and then I'm exposing myself to the people that are farther back.
It's fascinating you said that, because I think actually what happens here is that America just walk in from behind. These guys are so focused on all that mayhem down there, almost enjoying themselves. And the accounts say the attack came in. I think they almost strolled in. I don't mean that in any disrespect, the Americans who came in, but they're just coming in and almost tapping these guys on the shoulder because they've been so focused on that. Boom, they walk in the back there, and these Germans are, oh, oops.
And you've got to remember that these guys are really, really undertrained, low-grade troops. Even though a lot of them are from the 352nd, which has always been sort of written up as an elite division, you know, it absolutely isn't. It's not terribly difficult to stay at your post and fire a machine gun. I mean, you know, you don't need an awful lot of training for that.
Right.
But it does mean that, you know, when you are expected to use your initiative, think about things about coming out the back and a wider firing arc, and
Yeah, they're out of their depth there.
they're out of their depth. They just can't do it. And their brains are so addled by what is happening. I mean, you know, who can blame them, frankly?
But I don't want to imply the Americans had it all their own way.
Obviously, in those first initial waves, it was absolutely horrific.
About 90% of platoon commanders in the first wave are
This
killed
is at
or wounded
6:30
in the first 5 minutes. They're waiting to be led, but the guy who's been leading them in all the training and the running out the landing craft, running to the wall, running out the landing craft, he's not there anymore. But very quickly, the survivors and the second wave come in and start kicking their guys up the ass and getting them going.
Once they kind of put the spurs to the horse and they initiate that violence of action, then they can do exactly what they were supposed to do, which is move forward, secure the beach to the point that, like you said, when the subsequent waves come in, it's not as bad. Well, I don't want to use my most hated phrase, which is, and then their training kicked in.
but then their training kicked in.
But once they got here, and you know, they took a minute to orient, and they did what they were trained to do, they ultimately had mission success.
There was continual, though not severe, artillery fire on the beach. While it was sporadic, it was not harassing the troops too badly.
If you look at the after-action reports, and I remember looking at these and just thinking, whoa, you know, this is not what I thought. The officer commanding Company B, 116th Infantry. So that's not in the first wave. They hit the beach at H+26. They crossed the beach with a loss of 1 killed and 3 wounded. The officer commanding Company C, the 116th Infantry, and they arrive at H50, so 7:20. He goes, none of the men were wounded on this run despite small arms fire. The 5th Assault Section beached in very shallow water. Only 1 casualty was incurred en route to the sea wall. So I think it's sort of important to understand that the slaughter of the beginning of Saving Private Ryan, which everyone now thinks is kind of what the whole of Omaha Beach was like literally for 4 hours on the trot, isn't indicative of the experience of most Americans on Omaha Beach. It's such a fascinating campaign. It really is. It's so interesting. It's so multifaceted, and it's so much more nuanced than the narrative suggests. There's so much more to this. And it's only once you really start getting inland and you look at the landscape and you see the folds in the land and the hedgerows and all the rest of it, you really understand what was going on here and why it took the Allies so long, but also why the Allies prevailed.
For Mike and I, D-Day is over, and it's time to look at what followed. Today, I want to show Mike what I believe is one of the most significant, but largely forgotten, episodes of the entire Normandy campaign.
Where are we going today?
Well, we're going inland. You know, I think it's really important that everyone remembers that D-Day is just one day in a 77-day campaign. So we've got another 76 days that you and I have got to cover over the next few days. And that means going inland, it means getting off the beaches. And I just think there's this tendency to come here and pay your homage at Omaha Beach and here in Arromanches, and then kind of think that that's it, that the Allies have landed, they've got their foothold, and everything else is going to be hunky-dory, because it isn't. The race is on from the moment these guys touch down. And this is a race about supplies. It's about who can get into that bridgehead quickest. You know, if I get out the map again, it's worth looking at it. So here's the coastline. This is the bit that we've got these little pockets around here. Okay, so we've secured the flanks here and here, but you've got to secure the rest of the Carentan. You've got to sever that, isolate the Germans up here. You've then got to make sure that this stays secure on this flank. Then you've got to join all this up. You've got to keep bringing these supplies all over.
And I'm excited by the fact that we're really going to get into the mechanics of the operational aspect of it that gave the commanders here on the ground and the individual soldier the freedom to do what they had to do tactically, because they weren't thinking in the back of their mind, I'm going to fight my way across this beach, and then what's going to happen? I'm not going to have any ammo, I'm not going to have any food. How am I going to manage that?
Over the next few days, Mike, what I really want to do is there's such a well-trod narrative for the Normandy campaign, for D-Day and for Normandy. And what I hope I'm starting to show you is that some of that narrative actually needs massively kicking into touch. I mean, it's out of date and it's frankly wrong. So the first stop is the Canadians coming up against the Hitler Jugend. That's where we're going first.
On the 7th of June, as the Allies tried to link up their bridgeheads, German forces were rushing to the front. To the west of Caen was the elite 12th SS Panzer Division, well armed and highly motivated.
So this is the Abbey. This is quite a place, Mike. I've never been here before. I've been reading about it, but I hadn't realised what a complex it is.
Yeah, it's really impressive.
Battle damage there.
Oh,
you see around the door?
Quite a bit, yeah.
So this is where Kurt Meyer comes, and Kurt Meyer is one of the regimental commanders of the Hitler Jugend Division, the 12th SS. They're coming overnight on the 6th, so they're here by the morning, and his regiment is the spearhead. There's such a massive chasm between, you know, your static infantry division that's kind of manning the coast and something like the 12th SS. It's bristling with artillery, 88 millimeters, machine guns, mortars, the whole lot. You know, they've got everything they need. Meyer is super experienced. Right. Anyway, he comes here and he gets to this place and thinks, okay, this is a good place to kind of base myself. And he climbs up onto that tower. And from that tower up there, you can get right up there, you can get out your field glasses, your binoculars, and you can see all the way. And his instructions from on top are get here and push them back into the sea. It's as simple as that.
When it comes to the operational level, if this starts to become a war of attrition, if this starts to last 2 or 3 days, does he have the operational support behind him to then resupply all this, or is he lacking that?
The problem they have is their supply lines are constantly being harried by the Yarbos, by this kind of air superiority that the Allies have. You know, the moment there's a sort of gap in the cloud, bam, they're coming straight down on them if they're kind of moving around by daylight. Well, let's go on to Oti, you know, and see where they kind of took on the Canadians.
Okay.
The Canadians and British were advancing on Caen. By around midday, the Canadian 9th Brigade had pushed through to the village of Oti, just a few miles to the west of the city.
So what's happening here is the Canadians, 1 battalion of 9th Brigade has moved up. They're trying to continue the advance on Caen. And so they come up to here, and all the soldiers, the foot soldiers, have been coming up with some tanks, some Sherman tanks with the Sherbet Fusiliers. And here there used to be a kind of square pond, which is in the old days where they used to do their washing. And so the Canadians are kind of filling up their water bottles. The tanks then push on. Moments later, there's kind of a boom and then another boom and then another boom, and all the tanks are being knocked out because they've suddenly come bang straight into the 12th Hitler Jugend Division.
When I see this tactically, this is a kill box. You know, every little window here, that can be a machine gun. Every little window can be a sniper. Everything that I can see, they can see me.
Right.
You can have a whole panzer company right behind that, and that's exactly what you're describing.
But what's really interesting is the Canadians are, you know, this is part of the drive on Caen. So this is a continuation of day one. We're now about 10 miles inland. Carpiquet Airfield is just 2 or 3 miles that way. You know, so they're really, really close. And when they're here and they're kind of filling out their water bottles, they kind of think they're kind of almost home and dry. You've then got the British 3rd Division who've, after their kind of tough fight at Hillman, they're pushing on as well, because Caen is that way. So they're pressing forward. But of course, this is the moment where they come wham bam into 2 panzer divisions. They're coming into the 21st Panzer, which are kind of attacking more that way, and the 12th SS here. And the SS push the Canadians back. The trouble with the Canadians is that all their artillery is still down near Douve. And so this infantry battalion and the handful of the Sherbrooke Fusilier Shermans, they're kind of on their own. So, of course, they then fall back. The survivors then fall back to Buron, and the SS follow up. But what then happens in the evening, in the late afternoon, is finally the Canadian artillery is caught up, and the SS get cut to shreds in turn.
One could no longer identify the village. Smoke, explosions, and flames marked its position. I had never experienced such concentrated artillery fire before.
Effectively, the German counterattack, which is supposed to kind of knock them back into the sea, has absolutely just hit a brick wall just a few, you know, a mile or two from here. You know, it's got absolutely nowhere. And basically, they've been coming up against a handful of a Canadian infantry, some tanks, and a few guns. And that has stopped a panzer division bristling with weaponry and motivation and gung-ho-ness absolutely in its tracks. This is incredibly difficult countryside over which to advance.
Right.
I think this is really, really important. Again, it's one of these battles that no one ever mentions. You know, it's completely forgotten about. Who cares about what the Canadians did on D+1? Well, I care, because it tells you so much. It tells you, it sets the pattern for the rest of the campaign, or for a large part of the campaign. First of all, it tells you that this is going to be an incredibly tough, bitter, brutal, and violent battle. And what it tells you is that actually the Allied way of war, which is to get all your assets behind you, get your long chain behind you, fight that big war. You know, that is your way, that operational way of fighting. So you push forward with your armor, with your tanks, with your infantry, but knowing you've got amazing fire support behind. Anyway, onwards. We need to look at the rest of the days and weeks that follow.
So much of our understanding of the campaign comes from the perspective of Allied competence. But it's really important to look at events from the German side too. 3 panzer divisions had been due to counterattack together on the 7th of June, but Allied air attacks had cost the Panzer Lehr a whole day.
We are here. So, Mike, this may seem like a sort of, you know, nondescript country road on the top of a hill with some embryonic corn in the field, but actually it's quite an important part of the whole battlefield, particularly in those kind of early days following D-Day. So just over there is Tilly-sur-Seulles, and you can see it's nestling in the little Seulles River Valley. The other side, where those wind turbines are, that's what's called Point 103, Hill 103. And that is where the British are on the morning of the 8th of June. The Germans are arriving here. This is the Panzer Lehr, so this is like really good. This is probably the best division in the Wehrmacht. They get to Argentan about 5 a.m. on the morning of the 7th. The town is already burning, there's lots of debris, the sun is coming up.
13 hours on the road, you're tired, and now the sun's coming up, so you're about to be exposed to the Allied air power again.
Right, so they have this terrible time. You know, and the route up, you know, they start calling it fighter bomber race course, because they're just hammered all day.
The section between Comont and Villers-Bocage was the road of death. Sitting along the road were burnt-out trucks and bombed field kitchens and gun tractors, some still smouldering, the dead lying beside them.
As soon as they get here, the orders for bear line are hit the enemy hard and knock them back into the sea and destroy them. Exactly the same orders that have been given to 12th Hitler Jugend.
So I see the German forces here, and we're literally looking at almost exactly due north. So you can actually picture, like, you know, the German tanks laid out exactly like you said with the supporting guns, and the German commander looking through his binoculars across the other ridgeline, probably looking directly at the Allied commander, and they're just staring at each other across this open expanse that's a kill zone. And you know that anybody who's the first one to commit to go into this low ground is just going to get absolutely hammered.
The fighting starts really on the 9th of June here. And over the ensuing days, that is exactly what happens. You know, they do meet in the middle. They absolutely knock 7 barrels out of each other. And, you know, it's a terrible attritional fight.
How long is this sort of pitched battle going on back and forth? How long does that last?
A long time. I mean, really, it keeps going until about, well, the 25th of June.
Wow.
There's fighting in here, with neither side giving an awful lot of ground. But I think this is a great, great spot, because again, the temptation is always to look at things from the perspective of the Allies and not look at it from the German perspective. And actually, you know, when you're up here, it's almost like looking at a mirror image.
Yeah, I see it from the point of view of, I've been on the move for about 24 hours. I'm tired, I'm hungry, I've lost men on the way, I've lost resources on the way, and now I finally arrive here, and what do I see when I raise my field glasses? I see a force who's well supplied, well rested, dug in on the high ground opposite me, and they're ready to fight.
Can't really better that assessment. Right, onwards.
One of the things I'm learning from you on this trip is when we move into an area and I see the newer construction, that means this place really got demolished when the battle was going on.
And I'm learning a lot from Mike as well. I feel fortunate to be sharing this journey with both a friend and a veteran with such an impressive military career.
So how old are you when you joined 18?
18. I was 2 weeks out of high school.
Amazing. And then in the army. Yeah. Must have been a bit of a culture shock for you, wasn't it? Kind of a young boy, sort of suddenly you're in the discipline of the army and everything.
Yeah, but I think that was what I expected. You know, I expected shaved head,
all that,
bunk made properly, you know, getting yelled at, push-ups in the rain.
So when did you first go into action then?
I didn't see combat until I was a physician. I mean, other than little things during the drug wars in Bolivia, there was a couple of times.
So when did you get your Bronze Star? That was when you were already a physician?
Yeah, that was Afghanistan. Yeah, I think I had a lot of advantages in, by the time I saw real combat, I was older, I was more mature, I had a lot of training behind me. For anybody who's like fresh out of infantry basic training and going somewhere to get shot at, I can only imagine what that must be like.
But yeah, you must have seen unbelievable change in the army.
Yeah, I served under 5 presidents, so.
Not bad for a boy who enrolled at the bottom, straight out of high school.
So what rank did you get to?
Major. Yeah, I retired as a major.
Major doctor?
Major doctor, yeah.
As the day draws to a close, there's a spot I want to show Mike, to remind him that the Germans were not the only obstacle impeding the Allied advance.
Well, Mike, I brought you up here because I know we've been staying down in the town and you kind of get a hint of what's going on, but this gives you the scale of it, and isn't it enormous?
Seeing the big picture, you really get a feel for how immense the beach was and what it must look like, looking from horizon to horizon and just imagining all those landing craft. You know, I see this, again, from the point of view of German soldiers that have been here for quite some time, looking at the same seascape and thinking to himself, God, this is so boring. And then on June 6th, their whole world changes.
Yeah, it really does. And, you know, these are starting to be planted within a couple of days. They do the gooseberries first, the corn cobs, which are these old ships that are sunk. Then the phoenixes, those caissons that we saw in Castletown, they're brought over, they're all floated over with tugs. I mean, it's a mind-blowing logistic challenge. You know, if you were here in end of June 1944 and you're looking out this, you'd see all these piers going out, the pier heads, the jetties. You'd see this just absolutely full of craft, of merchant ships, of landing craft, of other bigger ships coming in and out.
Prime example of the Allies just totally maximizing Western ingenuity and coming up with this, that it doesn't matter that there's not a port here, we're just gonna make one.
Yeah, we're gonna make two.
Yeah.
But, and there is a big but here, on the 19th, 20th, 21st of June is what becomes known as the Great Storm. And it really sets back the Allied schedule in a big, big way. And the American Malberry is so badly bashed about that actually it becomes inoperable.
We're talking about 2 days of the storm, which is delaying you completely, right? That locks up everything you're trying to do, probably for those 2 days, in its entirety. Not only do you lose those 2 days, but then because of the damage that you just described on Malberry, then it essentially cuts you in half afterwards in what you're able to do.
And actually it sets the British back by 3 divisions. So those 3 divisions are the extra corps that Monty and Dempsey want for Operation Epsom, and they don't have it.
That's definitely going to affect your strategic plan moving forward.
Yeah, so for the next big offensive they're going to do, they can't attack with 3 corps, which is what they want. They can only attack with 2, and that is directly because of the Great Storm. It's awe-inspiring, though, isn't it, looking at it? I mean, what a beautiful sight this is. I mean, aren't we lucky to be standing here in peacetime? In the 21st century, we can do what the hell we like. We can come and go as we like, look out at that and just marvel at what was achieved by the Allies in the Second World War. But when you look at that, you go, okay, someone is thinking big here. What the Allies are doing is big war, and that is big war personified.
Truly astounding, especially when you think about how quickly they got it over and put it up.
Yeah, it's impressive. I wonder what you'd still find in these fields, eh, Mike?
Yeah, there's got to still be stuff out there.
Gotta be, hasn't it?
It's striking to see how these blankets of fields are so exposed. The Allies had huge advantages in firepower, from land, in the air and at sea. But as the 12th SS discovered on the 7th of June, attacking in this terrain was not easy. Allied air power severely restricted the Germans' ability to move, but could do little when the weather was poor, as it was at the end of June.
Well, Mike, it's kind of hard to imagine now, but this is actually this kind of start point for Operation Epsom. This is the first really big offensive that the British launch. And what would have happened is all the troops get moved up the night before. They're in the kind of sort of villages behind. Early doors at dawn. They're up here. It's drizzling of rain. It's miserable. This is the morning of the 26th of June, 1944. The objective is a place called Hill 112. It's this high ground. Once you get through that, then you're in the good position to kind of then burst through and have the breakout that you're looking for. So where the whole German line just completely collapses. For me, I'm looking at that. I think that's quite a big ask. I think it's kind of worth just thinking about how a battle in 1944 works, how a set-piece operation like Epsom actually happens. You get all your guns up, all your artillery up. You've got to coordinate your air power with your offshore naval guns, with your artillery, with your armor, with your engineers, with your signals, with your infantry. That's a lot of things to organize. My friend Steve Prince, who's the head of the Naval Historical Branch, he came up for a phrase with it, which was, you know, the constraints of wealth. You've got so much material, therefore it's more complicated. You know, you're operating on air, land, and from sea. And so that takes time to organize. It's not something you can just click your fingers and it's all done. There's a lot of moving parts that have to be organized here. Whereas the Germans have got less of everything. You know, they haven't got to worry about air power. They wish they could, but they don't. They haven't got any naval guns. They've got less artillery than the Allies. So they've got a kind of the freedom of poverty in a way.
Right.
If only we had more ammunition. Our artillery had to fire sparingly. Supply had become almost impossible.
What you do is you start off with a barrage, so the guns, your field guns, are lobbing shells over, sort of howitzers, lobbing shells over onto enemy targets. You then start advancing, your infantry and tanks then starts advancing behind that barrage. Lots of smoke, lots of explosions, your enemy can't see you, and then the barrage lifts. And there is this leap of faith where, as an infanteer, you've got to just get up and walk across the field. Well, I'm going to take you into St. Manview, which is this village down here, and that again saw some very, very heavy fighting. That place and Chur were both utterly destroyed.
The Epsom battle was underway, but coordinating advancing infantry and armour with the huge artillery fire support was difficult. It became obvious that both sides were on a learning curve.
One of the things that happens time and time again, Mike, is that the infantry and the tanks moving in behind the barrage of artillery always fall behind. So that means that that last bit, once the barrage lifts, they're exposed for longer. Having said that, they do actually make quite good progress. They managed to get into St. Manview and then Chur further on, and by midday they've got both of them. This is one of the victims of the battle. You can see there's not much left of it. Yeah. Never rebuilt, just, you know.
That's amazing, because from the road, you literally can't tell there's this much damage on the back side.
Yeah.
So this was from the pre-shelling to get everybody up into this.
And such was the pattern of attritional war. Small gains set amongst devastating carnage masked growing frustration when considered against the bigger goals.
By the end of the 26th, they're still a mile short. And actually, by late afternoon, they're still 2 miles short of the River Odon. Their objective of getting across that on day one.
For those on the front line or watching on a map, progress may have felt slow. But there was no question the Germans were being ground down.
So what's really interesting as well is that as the German plans are developing, the British are getting them. They're picking it up through decrypts, and they're following the whole thing. They get the whole story. So you see we're climbing up this quite pronounced ridge.
Enigma decrypts even told the Allies which panzer divisions were on their way. Yet decisions taken here by the British commanders in June 1944 have been the cause for controversy ever since.
So this is Hill 112. You can see why it's kind of key terrain, can't you?
Yeah, it's evident literally the moment you step onto it, and looking south and southwest here, but you can see anything that's going to move through here. I can call fire on anything through here. The tenet of he who controls the high ground controls the battle area is as old as war itself. This is probably the best illustration of it in this area that you can possibly see.
On the 20th of June, despite furious counterattacking, they are on this bit of high ground. But lots is happening at that time. And this is where all those decrypts of Enigma traffic is starting to pay dividends. So what they do is they pull back off Hill 112 and just keep a narrow bridgehead over the river so that they've got that crossing, they've kept that secure, and then just concentrate on making sure that as the Germans attack, they counterattack them with heavy firepower. And that's how you grind down the Germans. And that is very much the British and indeed American way of war.
You never want to pay for the same piece of ground twice. So a little part of me dies when I hear that. But at the same time, I completely understand, because it makes sense tactically at this point to fall back, still on this side of the bridgehead, right? We're defending the bridgehead, and just let everybody from the German side crash themselves against the rocks.
It ends any possible conceivable chance that the Germans are going to be able to do a coordinated counterattack in Normandy. I mean, it's over. I mean, Dempsey and O'Connor get absolutely crucified, and Montgomery by association, for giving up Hill 112. And you're right, you know, the idea that you've got to sort of give up ground that you've taken so hard fought, and you've got to do it again. And actually, over the ensuing days, I mean, this doesn't fall again until I think it's 22nd of July or something, and it's some pretty bitter fighting here over the next few weeks. So, you know, you're right, but just imagine what had happened if they'd been encircled.
All the armchair generals going back through the written record and seeing it through the eyes of the written record and criticizing, I think is a little bit of a cheap shot.
So what are the impressions? I mean, are you getting a kind of clear view of what's going on here?
Seeing it on the ground is totally different. And I'm noticing that the conceptions that I'm getting in my mind when I've heard about something or you spoke about something before we arrive there, and then when I arrive on the ground, it's a totally different picture.
Yeah.
And I really do think you have to walk the ground. You have to see it through the eyes of the individual soldiers, through the eyes of the individual commanders, to really understand what happened here. I think in hindsight, everything was done correctly. I mean, and the proof is in the pudding, as they say. I mean, ultimately, the goals were met. Maybe not in the timeline that was originally envisioned, but you know, what do we know about timelines? Timelines never survive first contact with the enemy, typically. We also know that in those moments that they tried to deviate from that patience, that's where things tended to go wrong. When they tried to do things the way that the Germans were doing them, or the way that things were being done by the Russians on the Eastern Front, those were those times when you pay for it.
No, but so tomorrow it's all America. We're going to the Bocage and seeing what happened there and seeing how the Americans managed to kind of work their way through it, how they worked out, again, a kind of modus operandi to get through the hell of the hedgerows. You're going to love it, Mike.
Looking forward to it.
Okay. Till tomorrow.
Till tomorrow.
Uh, 400 meters roundabout, you're going to come out at 3 o'clock, entering at 6 o'clock, and proceeding in an anti-clockwise direction.
3 o'clock, so going right.
Yes. I like my way better.
The seeds leading to Allied victory and the German demise were planted very early on and run right the way through how each side used its resources. In the Overlord Museum, 2 shining examples of this now sit side by side.
So Mike, you've got a Panther on the left, a Sherman on the right. And, you know, the Panther and the Tiger tank, they're big, they're scary, they've got huge guns. You can see why Allied soldiers coming up against these is going to find these pretty intimidating.
There's almost like a mythos that had built up around this Panzer.
Yeah, absolutely. The problem the Germans have is the bigger the tank it is, the more oil it uses, the more fuel it uses, the more complex it is. And the Germans are just incapable of making something simple. A tank is by its very nature complex, but the Sherman is about as simple as you can make a complex thing, if you see what I mean. These are the suspension bogies. Okay, these are on the outside of the wheels, which means if something goes wrong, you can just unbolt it, put another one on. Whereas you look at this, to get to the suspension here, you've got to get right out the other side.
Yeah.
And look at all these wheels. I mean, it's so ridiculous. So there's like 28 wheels on it or something like that on a Panther.
That's incredibly overcomplicated. This isn't thinking about the end user.
Right.
This is thinking about what a cool thing we can make.
I think there is something in that. I mean, in early 1942, they both sit down, both the Germans and the British sit down and think, okay, we need new tanks. So the British come up with, okay, first of all, we need a decent gun. The second thing is we need reliability. The third thing, we need ease of maintenance. Kind of armor and stuff is way down. The Germans have exactly the same kind of thought process, but there is big gun, lots of armor. That's their top priorities. You know, maintenance and reliability is way down the list. The bigger the tank, the more problems you've got.
Every component part that's in this tank is a potential point of catastrophic failure.
The Germans and Allies are thinking about this stuff at the time. You know, they're thinking through. I mean, the Americans and the British, their whole approach is one of amazing pragmatism. Efficiency. It's about having as few number of moving parts as you possibly can and just making it simple and interchangeable.
I think it's fascinating, James, that in looking at these two vehicles, I think there's hundreds of examples of this. But the fact that in this particular exhibit, the 2 examples are sitting side by side. I had models of both of these, and the Sherman model was quicker to put together, much like the Sherman was, and very smooth and not very complicated, right? The Panzer model was extremely complicated, and after you put it together, you had to put all the bits of track and the road wheels on the outside, right? So lots of detail, so lots of points of failure.
Yeah, so scaled down is exactly the same.
It illustrates it perfectly. We knew it at 8 years old, but we're only now figuring it out again as adults.
That's absolutely brilliant. Love it.
Though in 1944, it wasn't toy models, it was very real war.
This is a point where things get complicated for a bunch of different reasons. You know, the initial invasion being complicated, but now you've moved from the one big linear target. So like I was saying, it's 4-dimensional. It's not 3-dimensional, it's 4-dimensional. You have the element of time and the human factor.
As we move deeper into the American sector of the battlefield, our next stop is the town of Carentan, the hinge between the main bridgehead and the Carentan Peninsula. Capturing this vital town was the job of the US 101st Airborne.
Well, here we are in the centre of Carentan. This is a town that gets really, really bashed about, Mike. And of course, it's famous because this is where the 101st and the Easy Company and stuff are back in action again. It's decided that they're going to go and attack Carentan on the morning of the 12th. So overnight, as they're coming into position, the Germans are also going out, but one company is left to defend it. And, you know, what we see in Band of Brothers and everything, that is that fight the following day, coming into the town. It's the last outpost. It's snipers, it's machine gun teams, it's things like that. It's not a huge amount. But then the 17th Panzer Grenadier SS Division are coming up. The 101st Airborne have to resist that counterattack, which they do. But it's why there's such a lot of fighting around here, around Carentan. But having got into the town, having made the link up on the 11th, secured it on the 12th, then, you know, this is the hinge between the Carentan Peninsula and the main invasion front secured. So that is big tick. Job done.
Carentan was badly hit. A square was a mass of rubble, still smell of burning wood. German barracks in the center of town, discards as though they had picked up in a hurry and gone out.
But you can see these guys here, and you can just see the amount. I mean, look how much stuff there is on the ground. Civilians wandering past, but you know, you can see that building there. You can see it's completely new, can't you? But all the others, I mean, it's absolutely one and the same place. We're standing where the photographer's standing.
Exactly the same spot.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it? To be here 75 years on.
While the British and Canadians ground down German forces across the wide open fields around Caen, the challenge for the US troops came from the bocage.
Now, can you see the bocage here? Can you see? Okay, so the bocage is this mound on which you then have the hedgerows.
Right.
So the mounds are built as kind of walls to start off with, and then they grow hedges on top.
Yeah, it's like a causeway built for the hedge.
That's exactly what it is.
The challenges of attacking through bocage were immense.
So, Mike, we're kind of on the top of this ridge now. This is this high ground to the northeast of Saint-Lô, and this is the main next defensive line for the Germans. And when the 2nd Infantry Division get up here on the 11th of June, the Germans are absolutely entrenched here. They have double the number of machine guns that an ordinary infantry regiment has. They don't have a huge amount of fire support, but they've got lots of mortars, lots of machine guns. And in this countryside, that makes them super deadly. You know, you can see it's such dominating countryside around here. You know, we've been driving up from the coastal area, and all that time we've been gently climbing up. You can absolutely see why the Germans would use this as their kind of next defensive line. Their Hauptkampflinie, as the Germans called it. And so on the night of the 6th of July, First Lieutenant Ralph Winstead, with just a handful of guys, crawls across this field behind a barrage of artillery and mortars which rain down on this field here in this corner. And behind the smoke, behind the mayhem of the explosions, all the rest of it, they managed to creep up to here, and there's wire here and all sorts of stuff, as well as the hedges. And they managed to get a Bangalore torpedo, and they feed it up through the field, up into that corner, boom, and then charge it, hurling grenades, and they take it out.
Nice.
And so that is one corner, and they hold this ground here. And that is one bit. And so what the Germans do, of course, is when these strong points are taken, they then retreat back to the next field. And look at this, is just classic bocage. So you've got the mound, and then you've got the hedges on top. And if you're a defender, look at that, that's just perfect. I can sit down here in this corner, you know, obviously there's no brambles and stuff. I can sit down here with my machine gun. I've got an amazing field of fire. Anyone trying to move to anywhere in this arc, on that road, anywhere around here, I can see.
These are great to defend and absolutely a nightmare to attack.
Yeah.
Because not only do you have all the advantages in the defensive position that you talked about, but as these are laid out at intervals, and we've seen them the whole drive up here, every time you hit one of these, you have to come up and crest it, which means if they're the next one over, you just exposed yourself to all that enemy fire.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're so thick, they're really hard that, you know, it's not like you can kind of slither through these and come down the other side. And then as soon as you do, you're in open ground.
By the end of June, General Juro comes around and sees the 102nd Tank Battalion and says, you guys got to find a way to get through these hedgerows. This is an absolute nightmare. You know, just think of something. So that night, they have a little kind of officers and senior non-coms. They gather around and they go, okay, what are we going to do? And there is this guy called Sergeant Coolin, Curtis Coolin, and he says, well, I just wonder whether you could like put a fork on the front of the Sherman, and maybe that would just sort of, you know, because the problem is getting to the roots. Maybe that would kind of slice through the roots and push on through. And this other guy goes, okay, well, you know, I know. Why don't we use the kind of the Rommel's obstacles, the tetrahedrons that have been on the beaches? Why don't we get one of those and sort of use that? And so they bolt this thing on and they give it a test. And it just cuts through this hedge like butter. It's just phenomenal. There is no other army in the world in 1944 that could do that.
I wonder if Rommel ever figured out what a favor that he did us by leaving all that scrap metal on the beach. I mean, this is the best example there is of good old-fashioned American innovation. Hey, we've got these hedgerows, we don't know how to get through them. Hold my beer.
Within a week of that happening, Bradley is witnessing it. I want every tank in First Army to be equipped with a hedge cutter, ASAP. Another 2 weeks they are. So by the time of Operation Cobra, which is launched on the 25th of July, 60% of First Army's tanks have got hedge cutters.
Innovation in the field. Evolution made possible by big war. And now, the breakout. July 1944. 6 weeks after the initial beach landings, a stable bridgehead had been established, and supplies were crossing the channel effectively. Inland, the campaign had become a battle of attrition, exactly what the Allies didn't want. Caen finally fell on July the 9th. The Allies needed their decisive breakout, and they needed it urgently. Operation Goodwood, the commanders in London were led to believe, would deliver this, but the advance fell short. Fierce controversy has endured ever since.
Well, actually, Mike, this is an amazing view because this is the Goodwood battlefield in front of us, just right here. You can see Caen over there, you can see the chimneys of Columbell. It's that wooded ridge there, that's the Breville Ridge where we were on a kind of literally day one when we were in Normandy. Right. You know, Troarn's over that way. This is where Goodwood comes through, 48,000 men, over 1,000 tanks. And of course, preceding that, over 2,000 bombers. You know, but they do achieve a 7-mile breakthrough. It isn't the decisive breakthrough that gets them over the other side of the Burgos Reach. They don't go to Falaise, but they do make significant grounds. Everyone back in London is absolutely furious. You know, they just think, what? You know, we were promised a breakthrough. We put so much air effort into this, and they haven't done the breakthrough. What were they thinking? They had all this firepower. They couldn't get through. You know, they lost 400, 500 tanks in a day. You know, and again, that needs qualifying because 493 British tanks out of, you know, well over 1,000 suffer some kind of battle damage. But actually, within 24 hours, over 268 are back in action.
We lost 37 tanks at Goodwood, but within 10 days, we were back at full strength.
And what that tells you, of course, is that huge long tail that we've been talking about over and over again. That big war is really coming into play. It's always depicted that the British and the Canadians are banging their heads against a brick wall of panzer divisions. And yet, actually, quite the reverse is true.
James, it's funny that you use the metaphor of the brick wall because the image that I had in my mind when you were telling the whole story was something similar. Imagine in this field, imagine if a farmer came out and he sees a granite rock sticking up out of the ground. He's carrying a shovel with him. He starts to bang that shovel against the rock. He's chipping off some pieces of rock. He's getting around a little bit. He thinks he's going to dig this rock up to get it out of his field, right, so it doesn't damage his plow. All the while, the end of that shovel is getting bent. It's getting dulled. It's weakening the shovel. And what that farmer doesn't know is that's not a granite rock. It's a granite boulder, as big as his tractor under the ground. And he's continually striking against it. And sooner or later, that shovel's gonna bend, the handle's gonna break, and it's gonna be completely destroyed. Because what you see in the form of the Allied forces is that rock, but it's an entire granite boulder behind it. And the German army is the shovel just mashing itself against it, and ultimately it will be destroyed.
Do you know what? I think that is the best analogy of the attritional period of the Normandy campaign I have ever heard. Spot on. I completely agree with that. And what's really interesting is that at the end of Goodwood, all the senior commander are in a massive grump. In this period, the British and the Canadians and the Americans have unquestionably won the battle of supplies. They've won the battle of the build-up. The outcome of this campaign is no longer in doubt. And actually, although the Allies don't know this at this moment, Goodwood is the end of this period of attrition. And what is about to happen is the breakout.
The controversy over Operation Goodwood hinged not on what was achieved, but on what was promised to Eisenhower and Tedder back in London. And the person at the centre of this storm was General Bernard Montgomery. It's an issue, though, that needs more detailed understanding, and I want to walk Mike through the case for Monty's defence.
Everyone was getting a bit fed up and a bit exhausted by the second week of July. There's this feeling back at home, at the top, through the different parts of the services that, you know, they're still in this area here. And there is this sense that the British particularly are losing their way. And there is a lot of that blame is starting to be directed towards Montgomery. And so Dempsey, who's the British Second Army commander, comes up with this idea for Operation Goodwood. He starts sort of saying, well, you know, maybe we can get all the way down to Falaise, and that would be great because that'll anchor those panzer divisions that are concentrated around here to this area, keep them away from Bradley's plans for Cobra. And if we do get all the way to Falaise, even better, you know, that'd be great. So Eisenhower and Tedder absolutely latch onto this. You know, they think, great. And they hear this sort of, they get this sense that this is going to be a breakthrough. And so Eisenhower says to Monty, you know, what is it I can do to help? Is there anything? And Monty says, completely unperturbed by the carnage in Cannes, says, yeah, what I'd really like is lots of heavy bombers here. Privately to Dempsey, he's saying, I don't think a breakthrough is that likely. So Monty scales it back, and it's really interesting. On the 15th of July, he says, look, I think you just need to kind of aim back a little bit. And I've written down here what he says. So he says, OK, so the aim of Goodwood is to do this. First of all, to engage the German armour in battle and write it down. So basically it means chew it up to such an extent that it is of no further value to the Germans as a basis of the battles. Second is to gain a good bridgehead over the River Orne, so this side on the eastern flank, through Caen, and thus improve our position on the eastern flank, so up here, really. The problem is that Monty doesn't let Eisenhower and Tedder know that he's scaled this back.
Interesting.
He basically wants to make sure he gets that bomber support. And he knows he's not going to get the authorization to use those heavy bombers, and we're talking about 2,000 aircraft, unless he continues with to slightly let them think there is a chance of a breakthrough.
That's really interesting. There are a few things about Montgomery's plan that kind of stick out to me. First, he clearly defines kind of three command imperatives, three ways that he's going to define mission success.
Yep.
And we still do that today. It's really important. You cannot have mission success if there is no clear definition for it.
I think it is really important to remember that this, you know, those are the orders from Monty. That's it. It's kind of one sheet.
Yeah.
The detail of the battle plan, the conception of the battle plan is 100% Dempsey's. So if it goes wrong, in a way, it's kind of Dempsey's. We should be blaming Dempsey rather than Monty.
Right.
Except there is this communication issue. I think he recognizes that Dempsey's talking too big, but he also knows that Eisenhower and Tedder back home, with all the political pressure they've got in London, they are expecting this. They're expecting the breakthrough, and that is all, that expectation of the breakthrough is the kind of precondition for authorizing that amount of strategic air force to support the attack. Yeah. And what is interesting about Goodwood is actually it achieves all that he sets out, but not what Tedder and Eisenhower are expecting. And he's going to get some flack for that, which, credit where credit's due, he takes on the chin.
If I'm one of Monty's men, and you're telling me this story just like you are right now, after the fact, I'm thinking to myself, My boss lied to his boss to get me more air cover. I'm totally okay with that.
Yeah. Well, I never thought of it
Yeah.
like that, but you're probably right. But let's be absolutely straight about this. That doesn't make you a bad general.
No.
And historians over and over and over again have conflated this rather disagreeable side of his character, these clear interpersonal skills flaws, with being a bad general, and the two don't necessarily go hand in hand.
No, awkward dinner party guest, absolutely. Bad general, debatable, but I don't think so.
I agree.
Discover the past with exclusive military history documentaries and ad-free podcasts presented by world-renowned historians, all on History Hit. Watch them on your smart TV or on the go with your mobile device. Download the app now to watch everything, from the gripping story of the Band of Brothers to Operation Barbarossa and D-Day. Immerse yourself in the dramatic stories of this remarkable era by signing up via the link in the description.
Heavy bombers would be used again in the next major Allied operation. But it was the fighter bombers that really hampered the Germans. Here in Caen, there's one particular type I want Mike to see.
I can't wait for you to see this, Mike. Isn't that great?
Oh my God.
So that is the rocket-firing Hawker Typhoon. Developed as a replacement for the Hawker Hurricane, you know, one of the heroes of the Battle of Britain, but actually became the kind of #1 air-to-ground attack aircraft. I just think it's so important to kind of realign air power right at the very heart of the Normandy campaign.
Sure.
We just get so fixated with the beaches, and we get so fixated with the land battle, we forget about what's going on in the skies. You know, and I've said it before, you know, when you're looking at all these German memoirs, you're looking at diaries and stuff, the one thing they go on about all the time is the Yarbos. And what they're talking about when they're talking about Yarbos is these guys. Because these guys are kind of hurtling down at low height, diving down on them and shooting them up. They're firing their rockets, they're dropping their bombs, they're riddling them with cannon fire. Air power plays such a key role in the build-up to Normandy, destroying the Germans' method of getting to the Normandy bridgehead anytime quick. That's all down to air power, blowing up bridges, shooting up railway trains. But it really comes into its own in the final phase of the Normandy campaign, when the breakout is starting to happen. And that is when you really see the air power absolutely dominating the battle space. You know, whatever the Germans do, bam, down they come.
Seeing this and hearing you describe it really fleshes out what I think is missing from the typical documentary and Hollywood narrative. But this is what you don't see. You don't see the air power aspect of it. It's never very well depicted. And when it is, all you see is columns of German vehicles fleeing the beachhead.
And it's a role that absolutely has to be hammered home. It's really, you know, when you're understanding the Normandy battle, you have to put air power absolutely at the center of the whole thing, before D-Day, on D-Day, and the Battle of the Attrition. But it's in this final phase where it really, really pays dividends.
Yeah.
And when we were looking at Goodwood, we knew that Goodwood was the kind of sort of precursor to Bradley's effort, Operation Cobra. And Cobra is what we're going to be looking at next. And for Cobra, the whole battle plan revolves around air power as much as it does what's happening on the ground.
We're now heading back west to follow the Americans. After long weeks of slogging through the brutal bocage, Saint-Lô was finally taken on the 19th of July. General Bradley's First Army was ready to make an all-out strike against the battered Germans to the west, with new tactical developments folded into their battle plan.
It's now time to do the major set-piece battle. Bradley's plan is Cobra. He's also developed a very, very good working relationship, a friendly relationship with Pete Quesada, who's the 9th Fighter Commander. Bradley's going, yeah, the problem with this bocage is you've got all these windy roads. We're being canalised into these roads. We can't see round the corner. You can't see whether there's an awaiting 88 or something. You know, it's an absolute nightmare. How are my boys going to get through it? And Pete Quesada says, well, look, would it help if I put a pilot in the lead tank of your armoured column? He understands how airmen work. So he'll be able to send them the right message directly up.
What I find really interesting about that is that something that was a conversation over a very informal dinner between two friends and colleagues has now evolved into something that's formally part of our strategic doctrine. I mean, if we were to fight this battle today, most of what you're talking about as far as aerial reconnaissance and even a lot of the close air support would be done with drone aircraft.
Sure.
But the TAC-P would be integral to that entire process with the ground commanders. And they are, you see them everywhere. They're wearing an Army uniform. You get a little bit closer, you notice their rank and their insignia is a little bit different color. They're an Air Force officer.
Well, that must go back to this.
It has to. It has to. And now it's just a permanent fixture in the military at this point.
So I know we've been saying it over and over, but this is big war stuff. This is, I mean, the fact that you can get the best part of 2,500 aircraft on this tiny, tiny area, 4 miles by 1.5. I mean, that's unbelievable. And so the idea is that these 72,000 bombs cause maximum damage to the personnel on the ground below, but not so much damage that you can't then move through it. We're right in the absolute center of that rectangular box. So all around us, all around here, 72,100-pound bombs are coming off here. This is one of the most concentrated bombing efforts of the entire war. But the damage is just horrific. So the bomb line is sort of cuts across us, kind of west to east here. So this is, they're coming over like this, straight overhead, just wave after wave. And you just think how much airspace 1,800 heavy bombers, 300 medium bombers, and 350 fighter bombers is. You know, those bombs, and you know, people talk about the arrival of 1,800 bombers. And first of all, it's just a distant drone, and it gets louder and louder and louder, and then just the sound of the engines is utterly deafening, and then suddenly the bombs start falling.
I had heard my fair share of exploding artillery shells and bombs, but none could compare to this barrage.
Well, I mean, it's a massive destruction for sure.
Yeah.
And I made the observation on the way in, every structure that we've seen in this box has been built in the last 50 years.
Yeah.
And we don't see any old growth forest. I mean, you look at how young all these trees are here, that's quite a striking difference from what we saw just a few miles to the north.
That's true.
Yeah, so there was definitely waste was laid to this entire area, undoubtedly.
One had to play Russian roulette by trying to outwit the pilots while they rose back into the air after descending to attack.
An entire Fallschirmjäger regiment was annihilated. Panzer troops in this box were 100% casualties. They had 1,000 men out of action, either dead or wounded, 25 tanks and 10 assault guns. I mean, it was just, basically 75% of his surviving forces in Panzer were gone.
There were scores and scores of dead Wehrmacht soldiers everywhere, their skin turned a sickly green in death.
I think what's happened here is, in that 7-week period, the troops here, but particularly the Panzer for example, I think they've already been ground down. I mean, they're on their knees already before this comes. Here, it's 10 times worse. Right. And afterwards, there are soldiers who've survived who are absolutely out of their minds, literally out of their minds. They've gone demented with the effect of this intense bombing that they've suffered.
It's funny you talk about them coming out demented. It's only now that we know how traumatic brain injury affects you cognitively, and how that plays in with PTSD.
Right.
And there we saw a classic case of it, you know, severe traumatic brain injury.
Right.
You know, if you can just imagine every sense in your entire body being completely overwhelmed for what seems, I'm sure, like an eternity. You know, flashes of light, smoke, your eardrums literally bursting, your brain slamming around inside your skull, the vibrations from the explosion shaking your skeleton and your nervous system. The human body was not made to take stresses like that. So the fact that they were even able to continue walking at all and even be recognized as a living human being afterwards is even shocking.
But I see this as kind of the final straw. You know, they've had this terrible experience. They've had this terrible 7 weeks since they first arrived at the front. And this is just the kind of the icing on the cake of awfulness.
Yeah.
Cobra burst open the dam, but the Allies needed to block key German panzer divisions further east. The next British offensive, Operation Bluecoat, launched on the 30th of July, was another important attack, hot on the heels of the American success.
So, Mike, we're now in Caumont, and Caumont's an interesting place because this is actually the furthest that the Americans get in the first few days of the invasion. And you can see, you can almost see back to the sea. I mean, we're 25 miles inland, something like that. I mean, it's quite a good stretch, and obviously a very commanding position up here on the hill. The reason this is really important, this place here, is because the 1st Infantry Division has been moved round here for the attack of Cobra. In between time, the British have been moving 2 Corps over to here. So 30 Corps was already in here. 8 Corps is then moved round to here. And actually, Stanley Christopherson comes up here because he's moved to part of 8th Armour Brigade. They're going to be with 30 Corps. They're going to be on part of the attack for Bluecoat. And it's from Caumont here that Bluecoat is launched. And Bluecoat is another of those operations that is just totally forgotten now. And actually, it plays a really, really important role. And I think because of the success of Cobra, so what's happening with Cobra here is you've got, you know, Coutances taken, then Avranches down here. And suddenly you've got this hinge into Brittany, and Patton's Third Army has been moved down here. It's coming down this road and these roads, these 2 roads down here, moving into Brittany and further south as well. And then the idea is to sweep round, while First Army is kind of doing this. Bluecoat is coming down here, like that. That's the aim. And its success, I think, has been masked a bit by the very dramatic success of Cobra. Cobra takes more land, but Bluecoat draws in more German divisions.
All right. Well, and it's easy to see why. I mean, you're talking about Cobra, you've got the sea to your right as you're coming down, so nobody's going to flank you that way.
Yeah.
So you're fighting on your front and on your left flank as you fight. So
yeah, that's a really good point.
It makes sense that you're going to be able to push in deeper. Whereas with Bluecoat, they haven't tied this flank in yet. So you essentially still have a front war and a left and right flank war as you're moving forward. So that makes sense.
So what you're trying to do, you're still trying to get... Goodwood has come through here and has got this high ground here. Bluecoat, the whole point about Bluecoat is to try and push down here, and what everything's doing is going like this. And the Germans are staying here, and they're going to be pushed back. And the hope is that eventually they'll get completely encircled, and you'll come down like this and meet.
And that's a classic maneuver that we still use today. You swing. I was always taught calling it swinging the gate. You start with the position here. That way you keep all of your supporting forces behind you, and you're doing an advance while keeping a pivotal strong point that you're not going to lose. And it really sets you up to kind of move that front with minimal effort.
But it's really nice, isn't it, to be looking at Stanley Christopherson's map. And can you see these places circled? Jerques, Labine, Ondefontaine. That's where we're heading now.
All right.
What the British are doing in Bluecoat is starting to do proper all-arms attacks. And it is amazing for me that, you know, we're on this road. This is absolutely the Axis advance for the Sherwood Rangers and for the 43rd Wessex, so the 4th Dorset Battalion. So that's the ridge on which Ondefontaine lies. It's a pretty dominating feature, isn't it?
It was very different, very difficult terrain. Hills, ridges, and valleys.
A squadron had to proceed along the one and only road, which was narrow and bordered by a high hedge on either side.
It's amazing, isn't it, though, to kind of be following these people all the way. You know, we've been following people from southern England before the invasion to D-Day itself, and then onwards, and you're so far away from the coast now, aren't you? You really feel deeply inland, and you're getting this amazing sense of the distance that they're covering. There's big old stretches of land.
I think that's the best part of this trip, is it's not just a snapshot of one battle that doesn't really give you the full appreciation. Literally following all this, knowing about the years of preparation, everything in the UK, everything that went into it, gives you a much better appreciation for the scope and scale of the entire battle for this area.
Nevertheless, a feature of Bluecoat was the speed with which some of the British troops were advancing.
So here we are in Ondefontaine. They finally take this on the 5th, and can you see that high ground over there? Mm-hmm. That's Mont Pinson, which is the highest feature around here, and it's an absolutely key feature, and they finally take that on the 7th of August. And, that's when Bluecoat kind of comes to an end. But by that time, it's been an absolutely amazing success. And where they've really done well is in 8 Corps. And there's this amazing episode where they've come from Caumont and they're coming down here. And while the Germans are kind of fighting some of 11th Armoured Division, a leading scout car from the Household Cavalry burns on ahead and manages to push on 6 miles beyond the fighting, straight through the German lines, pushes on through and captures this absolutely vital bridge over the river. And that means that within an hour and a half or so, the rest of the spearheads of 11th Armoured have joined him, and they push on onto this ridge. And the Germans have to deal with this. So they've got the Americans coming round here, and they've got the British pushing down really hard and holding this vital high ground over this key roadway here from Vire. So they divert the elements of the 2nd SS Panzer Division and also the 9th and 10th SS Panzer. So suddenly you've got 3 divisions, or what's left of 3 divisions, turning on to meet the British effort. And when you then add on 21st Panzer, which is up here as well, you've got 4 Panzer divisions diverted to meet Operation Bluecoat. At the same time that Bluecoat is coming to an end, this is when Hitler is ordering the Germans to do their last-ditch counterattack. So Bluecoat plays a massive part in weakening Operation Lüttich, as the Germans call it, from its main objective.
Play to your strengths and you play to your enemy's weaknesses.
Right.
And that's what they've been doing all along. And when the opportunities arise for lightning-fast, razor-sharp action deep into Nazi country, every time they rise to the challenge.
Now at last we were moving. It was an incredible sensation. 6 miles were covered in one day. All the objectives were reached. It was a breakout.
What Bluecoat shows is that the British can move with speed and a certain amount of the land when they need to, but it also shows that they're adjusting to the kind of geography they're finding themselves in. They're adjusting to the conditions.
The better your training is, the better the foundation of your plan is, the more room you have to innovate as you integrate your experience into the training that you already have, and that's clearly what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. But what we've got to do now is hot-foot it down to Mortain, because that is the epicenter of the German counterattack, the last-ditch counterattack they do, Operation Lüttich. And it's a place I've never been to, so I'm really looking forward to seeing it, to be honest. Doesn't sound good.
Yeah, now it sounds great.
That sounds great. Like something, my heart stops in these moments.
We're heading quite a bit further south to look at one of the most extraordinary episodes of the entire Normandy campaign.
Well, Mike, it's great having Paul here. I know he's been with us all week, but Paul knows this ground like the back of his hand, and so I'm looking forward to this because I've never been down here before. This is Operation Lüttich. This is the Germans' last-ditch counterattack, and it is one of the most insane orders ever given by Hitler, because for Hitler it's, no, we're not beaten yet, we've just got one more strike, we'll strike to Avranches and we'll split the Americans in 2 and that'll make them think, and then we can have another counterattack and then somehow we can win.
But interestingly, it starts off well for them, that's the thing.
Yeah.
The Americans arrive here, they've been into reserve, 30th Division come in, the 1st have been here first, they've gone off, they arrive here the night before, it's dark, they haven't even got any maps. of this area here, and they start sort of assembling near the town hall over there. And the next morning, under the cover of fog, and the Germans have been quite clever because they've known the problems of the coming up the roads and the Yabos coming in here. They're going to use, we think, this little village of San Bartolome as a assembly point.
Right.
So they're not coming down one direction, they're coming from 5. So we're on a crossroads where there's this road, that one, another one over there. These Americans here suddenly hear the noise of tanks coming in from 5 different directions. There's a little lane just round there. We know now it was 7 Panthers coming down there, and the Americans have some 3-inch guns, which is a huge bonus. They were capable of doing something. But they're having to fire at the gun flashes. They can't even see the hulls. They're firing at the flash of a gun. But luckily, and this is the beginning of things turning, they hit one of the tanks that blocks that. That's one route down, because the other 6 tanks behind have to back up about 3 miles, get off down another way to come in another way. But Colonel Franklin, the commander here, knows he can't hold this little crossroad. There's too much pressure. And he falls back about a mile that way to a big, one of the hedgerows like we've seen that bisects the road, make a defense. And there's actually fist fights between German Panzer Grenadiers and Americans. But then as the fog clears, we can now start establishing communication with the artillery guys over there, and then because the road to Avranches is on a ridge...
That means they're really exposed.
And then the Typhoons start coming in because now they've heard about it. But just for a moment, it looked like this German operation might do something. And I want to show you something cool, because this is one of those places where there's literally no evidence of the fighting. There's no tourism here. There's no gift shops. But there is evidence just over here behind us. I'm going to show you this because I think you'll like this.
Look at that.
There just happens to be a Panther barrel sitting in that field there, being protected by a
Isn't that
German
amazing?
A rusty shell leaning up against this side of that little pillar.
Yeah, look at that.
I actually thought you were going to show us another chipped piece of concrete. Like, oh, this is where something struck. This is
That's really amazing, isn't it?
Today, yeah.
But this must have been, you know, absolutely Panzer graveyard around here. But there was also holding out at Mortain, wasn't there?
That's
on
where
Hill 317.
I'm going to take you to next. Yeah, it's
great. Well, I've always wanted to see that.
I can't wait to see your reaction when you see that ground, Mike. It's incredible.
This has been great, hasn't it? Isn't it interesting doing the whole... I can't tell you how much... What a picture you get of the scale and the size and how it all fits together. That's what I love about this, walking the ground. So there's this sergeant in the 70th Tank Battalion called Carl Rambo, who lands on Utah Beach on D-Day. And he is involved in the counterattack against the counterattack here at Mortain. So he's come all that way in his Sherman tank through the bocage in the Carentan Peninsula. They generally supporting the 4th Infantry Division. It's a heck of a journey, isn't it?
Yeah.
So basically they came into this town, but there was this high ground on which this battalion of the 30th Infantry Division were on the top. And although the Germans swept through the town, they never cleared that spot. And of course, that's all you need to do. This is a kind of classic nodal point. This is what you've got to hang on to. And of course they don't. And it's this great heroic stand that's sort of gone down in legend. It's amazing, Paul, to finally be up here, having sort of read so much about this incredible stand by the 2nd Battalion of the 120th Infantry. And I guess this is probably one of the most famous hills in the entire Normandy battle story. It's a hell of a spot. So the battalion are they all on this narrow ridgeline? Is this where they are?
This is almost a dividing line. You've got Germans coming up the hill on this side, and you've got the Americans on that side. So the monument is in the right location, sort of facing this is the front line. This is no man's land, almost.
But you don't get too much sense of where you are until you get clear of the trees.
Oh my goodness, look at that.
My God.
It's pretty special, isn't it?
Wow. Wow.
On a clear day, you can see Mont Saint. Well, in fact, we can see it. There's Mont Saint Michel. Look.
Yeah.
So there's your the distance.
Rising up in the distance.
And the epic about what was going on here, the epic encounter, is the artillery, the importance of artillery.
Yeah.
The forward observers here, of course, they can American observers can see everything.
Yeah. You know, from down below, it's like, oh yeah, that's a piece of high ground. You don't appreciate what this view is going to be like. So this is, standing here, it's immediately obvious why this is the most important piece of real estate in the battle space right here. Because, I mean, look at how far you can see, James. From up here, I mean, you can clearly see everything.
The forward observers are the key thing here.
Yeah.
There was a couple on this side and a couple on the other side over there. It had to keep that communication going, because only when they can call in and coordinate the Typhoons and the Mustangs have they got the benefit of this. Right. Lose communication, and then the Germans have moved somewhere else. You can't bring in that power.
No, then you're almost in a worse position, because you're up here watching that happen and completely powerless to communicate it. So, because the forward observer is literally only as good as the communication that they can provide the units that are using that information.
And the infantry are doing a job of protecting that forward observation team. And one of the stories, again, that is just so incredible is our artillery isn't very far away. Our own American artillery is a few miles that way. They are firing bandages in shells onto this hill so that we can keep the wounded going to defend. That's the initiative again, and just thinking outside the box. And the infantry here are defending the observation team so they can keep this hill, so we can keep this vantage point. The other direction, this direction here, and these forward observers, without them we haven't any eyes. Right. The Germans trying to get this hill, they still think they've got a victory coming. And I think that hence the lost battalion, the Americans here, I don't know they feel that they're on the winning side at the moment. Right. We know they are now, but I think at the time when you're surrounded and you can see tanks in those roads over there and tanks over there, and you know that your cavalry, if you like, are still a few miles that way. It's a very lonely place to be.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really glad to have seen this.
There is one more place I want to see before we leave Mortain.
Yes, this is it! Oh my God, that's absolutely amazing. I recognise that already.
Oh, yeah.
That's amazing. Wow.
So it's from like about here, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop here.
That place looks abandoned.
Stand back. Yeah.
So that's the train station?
Here, by the old railway station, men of the 2nd SS were caught by anti-tank guns of the US 120th Infantry.
Yeah, so this tree is that tree.
Yeah.
This tree that has a lean still has the lean, as you can see. And there's a tree right here where the half track is. You can see they're all at regular intervals.
Yeah.
And there's one tree missing, and that's the one that the half track took out.
The counterattack had been the last gasp of the Germans in Normandy. We're now heading to what became the Falaise Pocket, the end of the battle.
So, Mike, this really is the Falaise Gap all around here. And if you think of the gap like that, what's happening is we're at the end of my fingers. And this is the problem. You've got the Germans who've completely imploded. They've finally been given the kind of withdrawal orders against Hitler's wishes by von Kluge on the 15th, on the afternoon of the 15th. And suddenly the rush is on. You see that ridgeline over there, and you see the ploughed field and then the ridge beyond.
Yes.
So the Americans are just over that. You've got the Canadians coming down this way. You've got the Polish armoured division on the left flank up on those hills. But here in Lambert-sur-Dives, in Moissy a little bit further on, it is a scene of just utter carnage. I mean, what you've got to understand is that at this point, two German armies, 5th Panzer Army, 7th Army, are completely imploding.
It's almost like you're vulnerable from 360 degrees as you're coming through it. And then on top of that, you've got these horrendous choke points that you have to go through, where they're just going to pick you apart piecemeal.
I mean, one of the people that's sort of captured here is Johannes Borner, and he was in He was in a company in the 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division, which had been on Saint-Lô up near, you know, Kraut Corner and Hill 192. That was the kind of neck of woods he was in. He was one of 12 in his company that got out.
Wow.
Every single yard he walked.
Wow, just incredible.
Yeah, you think how much we've travelled just in the car, and then to think how, you know, you've walked all the way from Brittany, you've been in unbelievably intense fighting, that horrible attritional bocage fighting, then you've been in full retreat, you finally get to here, and you're one of 12 still standing. It's just mind-blowing. You know, and this becomes known as the Corridor of Death.
This was the awful price of war. The bodies of enemy soldiers, dead horses and cows, broken wagons, disabled anti-tank guns, and burned trucks.
One of the worst choke points was the river crossing at Moissy.
So, Mike, this is the ford at Moissy, and 7 columns of German traffic converging on this one narrow lane and crossing point. And you can see how that's just going to get clogged, and there it is, look.
Good God.
Yeah. That's it. That's one and the same place. It's absolutely amazing, isn't it?
That's just epic level carnage. Look how stripped all the trees are.
Yeah.
Just everything. What we see on the ground today is just such a juxtaposition. There's a picnic table right there.
I know.
There's a playground on the other side of that hedge.
I know.
There's kids playing on it right now.
I know, but I think that, but in a way, I kind of think that's a really nice thing. I mean, it shows that, you know, life goes on. You know, you move on from the horrors that happened here.
Well, and
you see this kind of, this road leads up to the little part of the village. Oh, Paul, I need you.
Oh, OK.
Thanks. OK, so you see that hedge line, you see the farm buildings. Show them this.
Oh, good
That's the two with the brown rooftops over there.
Yeah.
So that's that hedge. You can see it's kind of slanting upwards.
Yeah.
But look at that, dead horses, knocked out wagons, another dead horse. But you were saying that people just couldn't live here for years afterwards.
No, indeed. There was the lanes had to be abandoned with the dead animals and cattle and horses and people, and just pushed the trees down and started again. There was a cloud of black flies over this for years. People couldn't come here without a handkerchief over their mouths. It was that bad.
I think it's just, it's such a beautiful spot. It's so hard to get your head around that here. I mean, it's just amazing. And, you know, what you're looking at there is just, it's the end for Germany. I mean, you know, it's the end for the battle in Normandy. It's the slow end for the whole war. I mean, it's just, it's terrible, really. But I'm going to take you to one more place. And again, it's a scene of carnage, but it's also a scene of just, it'll blow you away. It's such a beautiful spot. And that is where this really comes to an end.
All right. Well,
Allied victory in Normandy.
We've seen it from the beginning. I'm excited to see it through to the end.
Fantastic.
Our journey, which started across the sea and has brought us deep down into France, is heading to its end as we reach the very edge of Stanley Christopherson's map at Mont Ormel. Polish tanks fought the Germans on this spot until the 21st of August. 77 days after the campaign began, it was finally over.
So, Mike, we got to the end of our historical journey. This is where the campaign ended. You know, they closed the gap on the 20th, and the 77-day campaign was an end. But what a journey we've been on. You know, here we are, arriving into Ouistreham, come all the way across here, looked up here, swept around down here, following Cobra, gone back up here to Bluecoat and down, and we've ended up down here, and there's Mont Ormel. That's where we are.
So many miles, and we've done it by car in just a matter of a few days, but I really have a feel for what it was like. We started this off in the UK talking about the supply chains, talking about the logistics, talking about not over-engineering, talking about the genius in Allied use of steel over flesh.
And the other thing that's important to consider is, do you remember all the discussion about the phase lines and all the subsequent criticism about that in the years that have passed? If you're going back to those phase lines, The campaign ended nearly 2 weeks earlier than was predicted by Monty in St Paul's School on the 7th of April. You know, no one's complaining about that.
And that was the first question that I was going to ask is, what was that original projection?
90 days.
Yeah, and you know, you've talked to me about all that squabbling, about not only at the time, but in retrospect, about they didn't take Caen fast enough. They lingered in the bocage for too long. If at the end of it all, you finish the campaign early, all that means nothing.
And so what have you made of it all? I mean, what's your take on the battle now?
You know, for the most part, I have to admit that I think what I had in my mind's eye was probably the stereotypical D-Day story. You know, that of Hollywood myth, that of the just kind of skimming the surface. But really, when you look at that, you're only seeing the frosting on the cake. You're not seeing everything that went into this tremendous campaign. And I have such a better appreciation for it now, that it goes beyond individual and incredible heroics, although there were tens of thousands of those stories. It goes beyond that. It goes all the way to the core of who we are. It just blows me away when I think about it now, how I'd really been cheating myself on the story for all these years. That I thought it was bayonet charges and grenade throws and taking out some guns here and taking out a machine gun nest there. And really it goes all the way back to the planning, the individual rivets, blueprints in factories years before.
You're right, it's an amazing story, and you know, it's so good to give it its kind of broader perspective, I think. Yeah. You know, for so often we've just been looking at it from that purely kinetic angle, and particularly just from the kind of land angle. And it's just a much bigger picture, it's a much more nuanced picture, and it's a much, much better story. Yeah. That's the bottom line. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you've enjoyed it, and glad you know, listen, I've learned stuff as well. I mean, there's been parts of this trip that I've never been to before, and you know, I'm such a believer in walking the ground. You know, it's only when you do that that you can really start to kind of picture what's going on, and yeah, it's a great privilege. It really is.
It was a privilege, James. Thanks for having me along. I really appreciate it.
Oh, mate, it's been great. Come on, we got to get back to Caen.